Hey everybody, Wayne here. In today's overview and review, I'm taking a look at Storming the Gap, the first game in the World at War 85 series, designed by Matt Loesch and Keith Trachtenberg and published by Lock and Load Publishing. This review copy was provided by Lock and Load. Storming the Gap is the first game in the World at War 85 series. It is a hex encounter platoon-level wargame that has formations being activated via card draw. Set in an alternative history, 1985, World War III breaks out when the Warsaw Pact armies storm across the border of East Germany in an attempt to seize West Germany and the whole of free Europe. The World at War 85 system relies on card draw to activate random formations, as well as causing random battlefield events and friction, close air support, electronic warfare, etc. Meaning you never know which side is going to get to act or what exactly is going to happen next. The combat system involves die rolls by both attacking units and defending units based on the attacker's armor piercing or high explosive firepower and the defender's armor and terrain. Die rolls are compared, hits are applied, and most of the information you need to fight your units is on the counters themselves. Let's go ahead and do a quick overview. I have a partial playthrough of one of the scenarios for an in-depth look at the games. If you want to go ahead and check that video out, along with obviously a recon unboxing video. I'll cover my pros and cons after the overview, and then of course I'll end it with my final thoughts. All right, let's start off with a quick look at the counters and some of the unit types. So I have some units set up here, partially a scenario set up and partially me just kind of setting things up, kind of putting some units and out so you guys can see them. I'm going to probably have some graphics pop up on screen to kind of help explain things, just to give you guys a little bit of heads up if you haven't watched any of the previous videos or don't know anything about the game. So if you do know a lot about the game, you go ahead and probably skip to my pros and cons. All right, so in the game here, and here's a pretty standard unit, M1 Abrams. Couple key things on here. You can see there's a bunch of different numbers. First glance can be overwhelming. It's really not. Bear with me here. So obviously we have the unit type. We have a image of an Abrams here, so you can see you have this orange triangle. That's going to tell you something about what it can do, a special ability that this unit has. In this particular case, an M1 Abrams is better able to move and fire due to the advanced abilities of the targeting system. Top left, you have the AP firepower, armor-piercing firepower. Top right, the HE, high explosive firepower. Bottom left, armor. Bottom middle is the movement points, and then the color in the circle is the type of movement, and bottom right will be the assault firepower. So when you look at, let's start with the top left with the armor-piercing firepower. You have three numbers here, very simple. Hex range on the left, which you can, if you're firing at half or less range, in which case half of 11 right is 5.5, round down, so 5 or less hexes, it's going to be point blank range. From 6 then to 11, it's going to be just an effective shot, and then you can actually shoot up to double the range for a long range shot. The second number there is going to be the actual firepower. That's how many dice you're going to throw. So you'll be throwing 4 dice, assuming there are no modifiers that would change the number of dice. And the 5 is that would be the 2 hit you would have to roll. Top right, same thing, except that's the HE, right? So say you're shooting at infantry. Bottom left is armor save. What does that mean? So assuming someone was shooting at you, say another Abrams was, although that wouldn't happen in this game, say a T-80 tank was, right? You as the Abrams would roll 4 dice, and with each of your dice, you'd want to get a 5 to block one of the hits. Movement points, pretty standard hex encounter game. Same thing with assault. During an assault, the attacker and defender are both going to roll, and results are going to be applied evenly. So what you have in the middle here, you can see there's a nice blue stripe. Well, down here on the board, you can see you have yellow stripes here, very similar yellow stripes, and that's actually is from the same setup. I'm not sure why. So this is West German with the gray and the yellowish stripe, and then the red and yellow stripe are the Soviets. You can see there's some gray stripes here, also here. Those are subordinate units. In the order of battle for the scenario, you'll have those subordinate units. They're going to activate with the main unit formation there. So what am I talking about? Very simple. So we have our cards here, and this is kind of the core of the engine, right? This is what drives the system itself. So you're setting up, you're going to have an objective. Common one would be, hey, seize these objective locations. Maybe they start off under control of, NATO, West German, US forces, etc. And the Soviets are going to be entering the map and trying to take them, maybe take, 2 out of 3. Some of them, sometimes they'll have variable victory points, etc. But the core, the engine of the game, right, is drawing these cards. So what you have in this deck of cards for your formation deck is you're going to have all the different formations that are activated. And let's just run through this one real quick. So for instance, you have a card for these West German units here, and you can see it matches the stripe. It says the name of them, the nation involved, and then what you have here, you have 3 different numbers. The top one is going to be morale training number, so be a number you may roll against for different rallying actions. You have the headquarters range in the bottom left when it's of good order, and then the reduced headquarters range. Headquarters range has to do when you are activating, and I'll run through the sequence of play quick. Basically, when you're activating them, you're going to see where that headquarters unit is, and you're going to want to trace amount of hexes. So in this case, West German, this stripe, that's his headquarters, 5. Any units in 5 hexes away, which would be all these, just okay, no problem, automatically in command. A unit like this infantry over here, he's more than 5 hexes away. He would have to roll to see if he is in command. And you have, again, you're going to have cards for different formations for both sides. Here we have the Soviet Union for the forces that are out here. And depending on the scenario, sometimes they'll have 1 card, sometimes they'll have multiple cards, so they may be able to activate more than once in a turn. Continuing through, you'll find these end of operations cards. Generally, a scenario will say, hey, put 2 or 3 in there. First one is sort of a warning, the turn's getting close to being done. And when you draw a second one, generally, that means the turn will actually end. So you may end up drawing a second operations card before every formation gets to activate. It is a possibility. You have special cards, electronic warfare, which may interfere with headquarters and their ability to keep units in command. You can have a card like designated formation, basically means, hey, pick a formation you want to activate, right? A free-for-all. You have battlefield event / friction. Optional use, doesn't in the beginning, usually the beginning scenarios. They're in the later scenarios. Hey, you're going to add special events. You're going to go ahead and roll on a chart for those. You never know what's going to happen, right? A little bit of that chaos factor. Close air support. Helicopters are in the game. I don't have any counters out, but helicopters are in the game. However, the aircraft, fixed wing aircraft, are not. You'll have close air support cards. So suddenly, United States, A-10 Warthog. He's going to come in and conduct close air support. Chance of being interdicted and shot down, etc. All right, so that is the actual formation cards and the various cards you'll be drawing. And there may be a couple more. I just want to run through kind of the basic idea of them. After that, let's kind of look at the AEO, so Artificial Enemy Opponent. So with the Solo Assistant, which I use primarily for my play, you go ahead and let's look at a card. You draw a card. Now, the game recommends that generally you draw 1 card and for each formation. Say you're the Soviets as the enemy, you activate this formation, you draw 1 card. You can, if you want though, to kind of mix it up, you can draw a card for each unit and run down it. What's on the card? So pretty simple actually once you get used to it. Key things, 1, there's some dice up in the corner if you want to use that instead of rolling dice. I prefer slaying dice. I'm a dice roller, that's what I like to do. But let's look here on the card, the actual information. First thing, you check the priority. So you're going to check, starting off with the units. Generally, you're checking the unit and or stack that is closest to your side, right? In which case, say it would be this infantry here. You're then going to check priority. What the red, yellow, blue is, those are the ranges. So that unit or stack, what is their range to the closest enemy unit? If they are point blank range, remember I mentioned to that Abrams with 11, his point blank right is 5 or less hexes. This infantry here, he don't have much for range, right? He has basically, if you can see it, he only has 2 on his AP and 2 on his HE. Not much range on the infantry, right? So, based on that, is he point blank range? You check the red. He would maybe fire. If he can't fire, he would do an LRM, that is low risk move. So basically he would move into cover, move out of line of sight generally. Yellow is going to be that effective range, kind of that mid range. He's going to fire at the closest vehicle. If he can't do that, he's going to move towards, right? He's going to move towards the enemy. Or if he's, say, extended range, then it's going to say execute counteractions. Tells you to go down here. Now there's another player rate sheet that has some counteractions on it. Also, you go to the secondary here. AEO, Artificial Enemy Opponent, closest to a target. And this would be anybody, move towards. So say you're not able to do any of these on the priority list with that stack. You would then check the secondary, and you would check whichever AEO is closest, which in this case would be him anyway, move towards, which we probably already would have done something here, but you get the idea, right? It's telling you what to do, and if you're using that same card for formation, then you go to the next stack. Say this BMP here, or this T62 here. Start down, right? You run through. You can either do a card or 1 card for each formation. I like the 1 card idea because it gives me an idea that Basically the commanders outside of this battlefield, right, are giving one order to the formation. Well, a series of orders, right, depending on kind of what's going on in the battlefield. But very simple to run through. The solo assistant comes with the manual as well. So if any questions on any of these terms, they're explained pretty clearly in there. All right, so covered that. Sequence of play. A game is going to start with an initiative phase. That's the very beginning of the game, not each turn. It's going to be, hey, for instance, for the most part, say you'll have the Soviets off the map. You get to set up your defenders, NATO defenders. Soviets are going to enter the map during the initiative phase. That just means that they get to activate their formation first without messing with the cards, right? It's just a free activation. Then you're going to go ahead and start drawing the operations cards, right? It's the operations phase. You draw a card, you check it. Is it formation? Is it close air support? Electronic warfare? Battlefield event? You run through all those. If it's formation, simple steps. You refresh, ops complete, auto command markers. You check command status. Remember, are they in command? You deploy headquarters. You can see some of these boxes over here. One of the unique things about this game is headquarters and squad weapons. For instance, this Milan 2 anti-tank guided missile starts in this box here. You actually deploy him onto the infantry right when you feel like, hey, this infantry wants to fire, etc. And he's not part of this step. This is the deploy headquarters step. He's already on the map actually. But he would get to deploy on any one of his units. And then from there, each of this phase or this step in the future, he can deploy to a different unit. It doesn't show that your real headquarters is moving. It shows that the like command and control aspects of it are moving around. You can do any possible missile reloading, remove any disruption markers, or you roll to, I should say. You check to see if you can. Remember, based on that training morale, that number right there. Offboard artillery strikes, and then you go ahead and take your actions, right? You pick a unit, pick a stack. Stacks can be up to 2 units, and you're gonna move, direct fire, move and fire, onboard indirect fire, so say artillery that's on the board, or conduct assault actions. The very end, when everyone's activated, or you get 2 of those end activation markers, or cards, you're gonna run through a marker removal phase, adjusting certain things, check victory points, and then start over the next turn. So, and like I mentioned before already, I kind of mentioned it was VP scoring a victory. Generally going to be, for the vast majority of them, hey, take objectives, certain cities, town hexes, generally take them, hold them. Sometimes they're worth variable victory points, and there's cards for that. Other times it'll just be, hey, hold 2 out of 3, hold the majority of them, or maybe hold all of them. So that should be the basics of the game. Between my previous videos and that should have a pretty good idea of an overview of the game, enough to speak to it. So let's go ahead and go to my pros and cons. All right, pros and cons. Cons first as always. My first impression of the counters was they seemed a little small for the art than the amount of information that's on them. Now, I do have good eyesight, so pretty quickly determined that it wasn't a problem for me. I had no problem reading them. But I do worry that for those gamers who wear glasses or have trouble seeing small text, they may struggle. In that case, if you haven't bought the game yet, you may want to double check that you can kind of read these counters, right? Like, how do they look, say, in a video like this? I'm filming at 4K, so it's pretty good definition, so it shouldn't be a camera issue. If you can see them from where the camera is, you'll have no problem reading them. If you're struggling with it, it may be something to kind of double check. Second, the solo assistant, it appears both in my cons and my pros. How is that possible, you ask? Simple. Some parts of the system I found work well. Other parts, I fear people who expect more out of it have the potential to be disappointed. So let's talk about the latter. The solo assistant is aptly named, as it's really more of a guide, right? And it's sometimes vague on the instructions. And because it is really just a guide, sometimes what it tells you to do is just plain tactically stupid. Now, I'm not even talking about wondering if a particular move makes sense, or if you wouldn't have conducted that move yourself. In those cases, I say just follow the bot, let it play out. But it may suggest something like, hey, moving a stack containing a formation's headquarters out in front of their lines and towards the enemy, right? And now it's out in front and there's opportunity to take opportunity fire or any hits from anybody. In those cases, generally when I was playing, I would override the bot. And in fact, that happened in my playthrough video, and I kept the headquarters behind the lines. Now, it's possible I'm misplaying the bot, at times, like maybe there's something in the rules for headquarters that I just didn't see and I didn't catch it. It does have its own manual you're supposed to check. But in the interest of kind of speeding up gameplay, in general, I would just draw a card and read it and attempt to follow it. If it didn't make sense, I overwrote it. It's just, at its core, the solo assistant is not a fire and forget type of solo system that just runs itself. Finally, some of the less frequently used units can add that touch of complexity that can slow down the action. Let me explain. The majority of the game is played out with ground units. Infantry, often with squad weapons being able to deploy, light and heavy tanks, APCs, onboard artillery, etc. I can't remember what scenario this is, scenario 7 maybe. You can see it's all ground units, right? And the first few scenarios get you up and running fairly quickly. But then helicopters get introduced, and at least for me, it started bogging down the game a bit. Now, helicopters would have been a very important part of a potential NATO versus Warsaw Pact conflict, so I'm absolutely okay with them being in the game. I just felt like at times they were introduced, I was easily controlling 24 ground units and managing their activations and movement and combat, quickly and efficiently. And then literally like 2 helicopters, maybe 3 units show up, and suddenly I have to access an entirely new set of rules to manage them. You will first see helicopters in the 4th scenario, then they appear, on and off, but it's usually just a few units at a time. In the meantime, like I said, the vast majority of your time and effort is spent managing ground units. It just feels like maybe the helicopters don't bring enough to the gameplay to really be worth having to learn their part of the rules for. All right, on to my pros. So, first off, component quality is excellent. Now, that is to be expected from Lock and Load Publishing, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be mentioned every time. Although I brought up my worries over the counter size for people with poor eyesight, I had no problems with them and found them attractive yet clear with all the necessary gameplay information. The maps are nicely done. You have green ones and then you have the snow-covered ones. And aside from me, just not understanding a rule here or there, particularly line of sight, which is definitely not my strength, they're fun and interesting to play on. Well done to the artist, Mark Von Marshall. Now for the positives of the solo assistant. First off, let me be clear. I definitely preferred having it when playing solitaire over not. Although the card draw formation activation system does make even the base game solitaire friendly, right? If you don't want to get into this, it is solitaire friendly, right? Kind of look at those games that are chit draw, card draw, same idea, right? But I loved having a set of instructions to guide my opponent. Yes, it's a little bit more of a guide, right? You have to adjust actions accordingly and occasionally make judgment calls, which the manual for the solo rules even tells you to do. But the majority of the time, I'd flip a card from my opponent's activation, and I could reliably go down the card and find an appropriate action. And on the advice of the designers, I let the card do a lot of the things I wouldn't necessarily have done. Sometimes it surprised me and it worked out. Plus, let's be real, how often is a battle a perfectly choreographed event, right? The solo assistant adds guidance and that touch of chaos that makes this game a wonderful solo experience. Speaking of the formation cards, I really enjoyed how activation and events work. I like that you shuffled a variable number of formation cards, along with battlefield event cards, electronic warfare, close air support, and even the end operations, right? It could be 2, it could be 3, and then you start drawing. I mentioned the word chaos previously when talking about the solo assistant, and that is present here, and I love it. Who wants to have, the 2 sides lined up, and then I go with all my units, then you go with all yours, rinse and repeat? Not me. Not in today's wargaming world. For the most part, wargaming systems and games have matured past that, and World at War 85 is an excellent engine driving it. The combat system, by the way, speaking of that, is very well done. It's relatively simple and easy to resolve, yet because of the colored firepower numbers, the system has a built-in way to tell you exactly what type of fire is being conducted. You can see the different numbers. Here they're black, here they're green. We had the Abrams, which I don't have on here anymore, but here you can see a Leopard, a West German Leopard. They're orange, right? Those numbers tell you something different. So it's not just the numbers, but the color tells you something different. Just like in real life, just because something is armor piercing doesn't mean it's the same, doesn't mean it's equal. And I don't just mean the variable number of firepower dice or the 2-hit numbers, but knowing that type, the color of the AP firepower. For example, I mentioned 4 of the Abrams has an advantage when moving and firing thanks to its advanced fire control system, and that is simulated in the game simply by having the color of the firepower dice be different, and it's able to move and fire with less or possibly no penalty. A Jeep with tow missiles can conduct a firepower attack, AP firepower attack, but is it the same as an AP shell from a tank cannon? No, of course not. And that's why the firepower for that is in green, and it has special rules due to it firing missiles. At the same time, some defensive armor is better against those, anti-tank guided missiles. You have composite reactive armor, and the system takes that into account. These T-62s, nope, plain old armor, right? A T-80 and Abrams, they have that special armor that resists those. And this system features that ability to simulate it. I don't know the exact origins of this system. I just know that it's not difficult to learn. It plays fast, yet you don't feel like you're sacrificing realism because of it. And final pro, I just want to mention, I love the player aids that come with the game. There's a whole bunch of them. And at first, it was a little overwhelming when I saw them, but I have them set up. I use the Secrets of Play one a ton. I use the terrain effect cards. Having all those in my hand and able to just flip through pretty quick, or as you guys know, most of you guys know, what I like to do is have them set up in front of me. You guys can't see it, but I have like clipboards and things set up so I can put my player aids standing up so I can see them while I play. Works great with this game. All right, everyone, my final thoughts. I am completely hooked on the World of War 85 series. You all know I love wargaming in general, and so I generally enjoy myself with most games I play. And if I don't enjoy a game, well, you guys know I'm going to tell you about it. But this game is just a blast. It wasn't perfect, but at the same time, it wasn't difficult to learn. The rulebook at this point in time is well done. I know there may have been some issues when it was new, the game was first released, but I didn't find any. And the rulebook is good to both teach the game and as a reference. Here's my rulebook. I just put some tabs in here just to make sure, keep an idea where the Secrets of Play is, although I have the player aid card, pretty much guides it. Action steps, movement, direct fire action, line of sight, range. Some of these things I had to check a little bit. Some of the things I don't, but I've reached a point where I'm playing it where I barely have to check this stuff, other than maybe, occasionally with like helicopters, the rules I don't use a whole lot. But other than that, rulebook, very well done. This game, Storming the Gap, and the World of War 85 series in general, may even be something I would recommend to a new wargamer. Now, let me explain. No, the rules aren't simple or easy, and normally I'd stick with recommending a much simpler game when we're introducing someone to the hobby. But the rules here, they make sense, they aren't difficult to learn, and once learned, right, once you really grok that initial, and you don't have to know everything, just have kind of the basics down, which the basics are simple, right? Flipping cards, building an activation deck, flipping them over, activating formation, and doing that dice-off type of combat. Once it's learned, the gameplay is fast and furious. Combining that with these beautiful counters and maps, this is the type of war game that catches the eye and then keeps you interested as you learn and play. If someone told me that they were ready to dive into real wargaming, right, and not just some small folio game, I would point them in the direction of World of War 85. So I can easily recommend Storming the Gap to anyone who wants a vivid, rich wargaming experience that can easily be played solitaire, even without the solo assistant, thanks to the activation system, but it just gets that much better as a solo experience when using it. All right, everyone, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you think of my review, what you think of this game in the comments below. And if you've made it this far and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Even if you're not going to watch all my videos, I really appreciate it. It helps me to get more videos to show off to you guys. So until next time, later.